Warning, there be tasteful cartoon nudity ahead. Warning. Hi everyone, my name is Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4.3 demo for the piece I call 1987 Mall Chic. Now, I had a real specific aesthetic that I was going for in this, but let's wait to cover that during some of the more boring bits and just immediately start talking about the sketch phase. Here during the sketch phase, I actually didn't know where I wanted to go. It was just sketching a figure. You saw that gesture line go in with that sort of ball at the top for where the head could be, and then the rest of it is me just filling in some stuff. You can see her gestured almost like she's a dancer or like she's being thrown through the air or something like that, and it was really me just kind of having fun drawing the human figure. There wasn't an end goal, although since I do these videos and I post things on Instagram, I was hoping to find an end goal, but at this point it was just about drawing the figure. As I was sketching in all of the parts of her anatomy, I was then thinking, okay, what's her face going to look like? Can I bring some character to this so that it's not just a generic naked chick, although I'm not saying that it didn't end up being a generic naked chick, but anyways, we'll get to that later. The point here was just, okay, I've got this figure, I don't dislike it, what can I do with the face to try and make something interesting? So I did this sort of sleepy look, thinking like, okay, well maybe she's laying in a bed. Now of course this would be a very uncomfortable position to lay in a bed, especially with that other leg all twisted around, but I decided instead to elongate her right arm so that we've got that nice curve going all the way from essentially what is her right knee all the way up to her hand. And then it's of course continued a little bit by having her left leg over it, and it sort of comes down. This is me now double checking my anatomy because the rough sketch was just messy. And so now we're starting to get something that feels a little bit more like a figure study or a classical pose or something like that. And so now what you see here is I switch through all of these different colors so that I can keep things separate. If you go back and you watch my link redesign, I do it in a much bigger way there, but that's what this is here. So right about now is when I decide I want to go for this 80s aesthetic. Before we talk about the logic behind the 80s aesthetic and why, I want to talk about this part, which is my rough flatting process. It's basically color keys, just trying to figure out like what is this actually going to look like. You can see me lower the opacity of the lines so that I can really just see what it's going to look like when it's finished, obviously with all the rendering and all that, but I can now get a bit of a previs into where I want to take it. So you can see kind of how fast my decision making is when I come up with an illustration like this, because since it's all just whatever I feel like, I don't have to adhere to too many rules other than do I think this is going to be interesting in some way. So that process is very short. We've already blitzed through this video very quickly, and we're already to the flatting process with no pre-draw, like no lines that I've pulled from some other place, no direction. It was just figure sketch, and then let's spin her upside down and see what that does, and then let's figure out the rough colors. And now here we are into the flatting. Now the flatting on here on the body, which is the main chunk of this piece, all of this is one piece, but I do separate out the leg that goes behind the other leg, just so I can keep those bits separate. I also keep the hands separate from the wrists, and then the head separate. That's a little overboard, to be honest. I didn't really have to do that. Oh, and then the fingers are also separate. That's all a little bit overboard, but it was just because I wanted to keep it clean and then be able to control what I'm doing a little bit more with through selections and things like that. I also worked on this on my way to THU, so if you've been keeping up with past videos, you know that I was at THU a bit ago, which is an indication of how behind I am on posting these videos, but I finished this while I was at THU. While I was at THU, because I didn't have my family around and I had those nights, well, some nights were at THU and other nights were just alone in the hotel room, it was like, okay, let's get a bunch of videos done, and that's why I was so prolific during that period. There weren't any kids around or my wife around that I want to hang out with or do something with. It was all just generating content. And so now here we are later, and the sort of backlash of THU was all the stuff I have to do. So that's why things have slowed down here, and that's why we're finally getting to talking about this video here, or this piece, but ultimately this video here on the channel. So the part of the process that we're at now is the flatting process. If you've watched this channel before, you've seen this a million times. So I'm not actually going to cover it too much this time. I may mention a thing here or there. What I'll do instead is talk about the illustration as a whole and why I made it and what the decisions were around the aesthetics of the video, or of the piece. As I did that nerdy guy a while back, I was thinking about the 80s aesthetic. I have made multiple logos for various reasons that are trying to capture the 80s aesthetic. I've done illustrations that are trying to be an 80s aesthetic. Here on the channel, you've seen that nerdy guy. You've also seen the sort of robo athletic guy that I did who had that 80s vibe going on. I work in the 80s theme enough that I know how to do it reliably, but I don't do it enough where I get to have fun with it and actually try new things. It's basically always like chrome letters and a laser grid, some lasers shooting by, and some gradients. It's like blue and pink and, you know, turquoisey, seafoamy green and all that kind of crap. And that's cool. However, I was thinking the other day, well, I shouldn't say I was thinking, I was being pathetically nostalgic, and I was just on YouTube watching commercials from the 80s and 90s, which I know that sounds super pathetic, but like I've just been in that headspace and it's been really fun. So I've been watching all these old commercials, and I was just thinking to myself how little of the 80s was actually like lasers and like synth wavy and like all that kind of, I mean, that was there, no doubt, but it was actually much more of this sort of like safe pastel-y kind of thing going on. And again, not all of it, and not all of it was lasers, and not all of it was this or that, and there was holdovers from the 70s, and there was the creeping in vibe of the 90s and all of that kind of stuff. But I was just thinking about how like I sort of in my head called it like mall 80s instead of just 80s or laser 80s or lasdies. No, that doesn't work. Anyways, so that's what I was thinking about when I did this. And so when I finished her figure and I spun her upside down, I thought, hey, wouldn't it be kind of fun if I took some of that 80s graphic design that I've been thinking about and sort of merge it with this pseudo classical pose, and then just do like my treatment across the whole thing that I normally do. And so it's kind of a mashup of this like 80s vibe, this sort of classically posed nude female, and then just in my style. So that's where all of this came from. The circles and the just basically everything that's about the graphic design of this was just totally for fun, kind of off the top of my head. I actually didn't reference 80s graphic design that much. I like sort of Googled it, glanced at it, and was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm on point. And then I just went back and did it. Another piece that you're going to see next, in the next video, I actually slide a little bit more into like the 90s, the very early 90s, and that is where I actually referenced the graphic design a little bit more, because I just wanted to make sure that I was nailing something specific. Something you're not going to see in this video, but I posted on Instagram, was I did a little bit of like a VHS filter over the whole thing. I'm not going to go through that here because I did it in Photoshop, and it wasn't like the cleanest process, so explaining it isn't great, and it's also not a super in-depth process. If you want to see a process that is similar that I actually did in Procreate, go back and find my athletic robotic guy. In fact, I'll link him down below so that you can go see that, but he's like a cyborg athletic 80s themed guy, and I do a VHS thing in there, but I'll say that method that I use is not like perfectly accurate. It was just me trying to use the tools that are in Procreate and see if I could replicate something that felt kind of VHS-y. So back to this. We're flatting still. Skin flatted. As you could see while I was rambling, some layers were changing in opacity. You could see that back leg was put in a certain way, and everything that I said, the hands and the fingers and stuff, were all separate. And now we're working on the eyes. So since she's naked, we've got hair, we've got hairband, we've got eyes, which are three main parts. I don't think I do the little like tear ducty part on this one. I can't remember, so we'll find out in a second, I guess. And then like fingernails and skin variations. We're gonna have everything from like slight tan liney type stuff to the blush in the hands and the face, and all that. And so that'll be like it, aside from the graphic design elements. So we'll cover all of it as we sort of hit the most important things to reference. What you're going to see in a second here is I'm going to make the irises. The irises are the same color as the background blue. I did that on purpose. I just thought it'd be fun to tie it together. And then in a minute you'll also see me flip on my color keys again, just sort of checking, am I keeping the right tone, and then I start getting the graphic design tightened up. Since it was just kind of blobbed in there, I start actually making that real. So that's this phase right here. I'm starting to actually make those circles that are floating around in the background just like true. I'm doing that with the circle tool, which, if you don't know about that function in Procreate, if you take your pencil or whatever brush you're dealing with and you draw a circle, no matter how crappy, and you sort of connect those two lines, or the beginning and the end of that line, and hold it for a second, it will snap to an ellipses. And then if you don't lift up your pencil and you put your finger, your other hand, down on the screen, it will snap it to a perfect circle. You can also do this with arcs. You don't have to connect those lines, but this is just, you know, once you figure out how to do the circle, just start playing with it. You'll also get a little edit button that'll pop in at the top, and you can do some manipulation of the circle or the arc that you drew. You can also do this with squares and triangles, and then there's really weird rules around like polygons and stuff like that, like polygonal shapes, but I mean, that's just kind of weird. It's not really reliable. So I would instead just, you know, I'm just basically explaining circles, squares, triangles, that type of thing here. I'm not going to bother zooming in right now, but we've got the blush going into the feet and knees, the nose and ears. We're going to put it into the palms and the hands and the fingers here in a second. Then we're going to get the lips, the eyeshadow, the darkening around the eyes. She's not like really make-upped that much, but there's like a little bit there, like you would with anybody in like a professional photography situation. We get her nipples on there, and then we start working on other skin tone variations. And then we're basically done with the flatting process. Now, if you've seen other videos, what I usually do is I wait till I have the ambient occlusion pass in before I do things like the blush and stuff. But I had a feeling that I was gonna, the blush on the feet and the knees and the hands and stuff was all going to be kind of general anyways, and that I liked the sketch of the face, so I was going to work really hard at keeping the nose where it was. So I thought that it was safe. I do think that I go back in and tweak it a little bit, but that's not really that big of a deal. So here's the tan line part that I was talking about. You just basically are trying to think of the way a normal person is and where sun hits. I'm not making it super hardcore like she was at the beach all day in a bikini and then like took it off. But if you just reference skin tone and you think about where light hits, sunlight hits and stuff like that, you can figure it out. And here that is just done with a white that's just had its opacity lowered, that's all. So now we're starting the ambient occlusion pass. This is done with a light reddish brown, very light, very desaturated, set to multiply, and we're going to go through and we're going to try and find the areas that are where the light would hit least, and we're trying to remain as non-directional as possible during this. I always forget where it is, but if you go into the brushes and you look at either, it's like the artistic section or the painting section, there is a brush called the turpentine brush. That is what I use for basically everything in this video. I use it for the eraser, I use it for the brush, and I use it for the smudge. I'm going to take a second to talk about my philosophy around brushes, because I get asked this a lot. I think all artists get asked the what brush are you using, what pencil are you using, etc., question. And the thing that I want to highlight from my process is I don't really make my own brushes. I don't really buy other people's brushes or download other people's brushes unless there's something people are talking about and I just want to see it or try it, and then I usually actually don't end up really using it. I use a lot of stock brushes. That said, I have gotten very used to the stock Procreate brushes, and when I go back into like Photoshop, sometimes I'm left wanting for a certain brush. So that probably implies that I should download some brush that I I favorite or something. But in Photoshop, I have some brushes that I rely on. I have a brush I made a long time ago that's kind of like a pencil-y brush, and then I have a hard round, a soft round, and those are really the main things that I use. Then I have a bunch of other brushes that are just around that I've accumulated almost by accident over the years, and I almost never use them. The most brushes that I use that aren't core brushes is like a grunge brush because I just want to throw some dirt on something. But to be honest, sometimes I don't even do that. I'll just brush it in, blur it, erase it, like push and pull at it, basically smear it, do what I want to get that dirt to look right or that grunge to look right, or I'll just use like a photo of something. But I personally just do not use custom brushes that much. I've known professionals that do not use custom brushes. I've known professionals that absolutely use custom brushes, and I've worked with professionals that have bought brushes from other artists and all that kind of stuff. It kind of runs the spectrum. One of the reasons I should say why I don't use any custom brushes is because I really like the idea of being able to use the stock software or equipment and not getting too hung up on my need for some sort of a special brush. That, by the way, is not at all a jab at anyone who does. It's just my own comfort level. I would much rather be able to sit down at anybody's computer, especially as an art director. If I occasionally have to sit and do something on someone's machine, I don't want to have to be like, oh, but where's that brush I always use? I just go like straight to the things that I'm used to that are already within Photoshop. In fact, that even extends to my iPad Pro. I do not use the screen protector. Jeez, I'm having a rough evening with these pronunciations of words I use all the time. And I don't have any grip on my pencil. The only thing I have on my pencil is a little thing to keep the end on, and that's just because I got it for free and I thought I should probably use it. And I have a case on my iPad because of course I'm not crazy, but I don't have any extra stuff that impacts the actual creation of the art positively or negatively. I don't wear a glove, I don't do any of those kinds of things. That's just my preference. If those are the types of things that are really good for you and you try them and they really work out, great. If you are somebody who's worried that you don't have those types of things, so how will you ever be a professional artist, etc., don't worry about that. That's not the important stuff. You buy equipment like that for comfort reasons, because art is about being, I won't say it's about being comfortable, but it's about adjusting your environment and your mindset and everything to whatever you need it to be in order to accomplish what you're trying to do. And if comfort is part of that, then comfort is part of that. So we're continuing the AO pass, and of course this is most intensive in areas with more nooks and crannies. So if you have the big smooth shapes of a body, there's less going on there. Then you get into like a face and hands and ears, and that's when it gets a little bit more intense. So when we move in a second here into the face, that's where we're going to be defining a lot of her as a character, the actual shapes of the features of her face, and then much more mechanically her hands. Now this is where I should start talking about all the things I had to fix in this piece. It was one of those things, I think, where the sketch came together so quickly and I moved so quickly into painting that I didn't really, I don't know, digest it or vet it, or maybe it's the fact that she's upside down and sometimes that can really be really like screwy to try and figure out. Sometimes it's just like a weird mind thing, but I had to fix so much in this picture. I don't know if any of my eagle-eyed viewers out there will notice, but her head right now is bigger than it is in the final, and her hands are different than they are in the final, and her feet, which you can't see right now because it's cropped, but her feet are different than they are in the final, and that's because due to various either reasons or directly due to feedback that I got from people, I ended up changing it. Now, feedback from whom? Well, like for instance, I was at THU, so I was working on this, and I showed the piece to Paco Martinez, who's one of my art directors on a project at work, and he was like, yeah, that foot's fucked up. And I was like, oh shit, it totally is. And he's like, yep. And then that became like a, how fucked up is it? Do I fix it? Do I leave it? Is it something that can just be chalked up to, oh, that foot looks like it was put together kind of quick. I'm sure he can draw a foot, and it ended up falling into the category of I need to redo this. So I redid not only that foot, but because I redid it, which we'll get to that in a minute, well, not in a minute, in a while. I actually get very far before I fix that foot. Then I have to fix the other foot so that it matches. And then I sent it to my wife, who was back home while I was in Malta, and I was like, hey, what do you think? Like, does this hit the 80s vibe? And she's like, yeah, it does, but her head's too big. And I'm like, oh, come on. So then I had to figure out a smart way to resize her head and then repaint in her hands and all of that. So it was a string of errors that I had to correct, because I don't want to say it's because I moved too fast into it, because I really don't think it was that. I think it was just more something I didn't spot, and I wouldn't have spotted if I took forever or not, which I guess proves why you should show your work to people. I know there's lots of people, it's just scary, it's all those things. I mean, it's not scary for me because it's something that I've been doing forever. Like, when I was in college is when I started posting on message forums and getting like feedback, and a lot of it just being like, you know, flame wars and stuff like that, because that's the way shit goes. But the point is that eventually you build your audience, and your audience can be your sounding board. Obviously your audience is going to largely like what you're working on. They're not going to be that critical, but it's still valuable, because even if people are nothing but positive, you can sort of see the absence of interaction, whether or not something is negative. Anyways, that's a bit of a tangent. The point is, though, you should also show it to people who you trust their opinion, show it to them in person, and get direct feedback on something where they can point at things or redraw something, or more clearly articulate than in like an Instagram post or something, how they feel about the work that you did. And it can change a piece dramatically. I'm not saying that this piece would have been complete crap if I didn't listen to those people, but it certainly wouldn't be at a level where I could feel happy about it. By the way, I mentioned Paco Martinez. He will be doing a guest video on this channel in a bit. We're almost there. And for those of you out there who speak Spanish, or maybe primarily speak Spanish, and sometimes when I'm talking on here, maybe the English is kind of hard to follow or something, Paco is actually going to do his video in Spanish. I'm also going to try and figure out if there's a way for me to do subtitles. I don't know if there will be able to. Maybe, I don't know. Even though I've been on YouTube for a while now and I feel like I'm doing pretty well, I still feel like I know nothing about it, so I don't even know if there's an automated way for me to do that. But anyways, the point is that he will be doing a demo on here, and he's super talented, so look forward to that in the future. I'm gonna let the video play out for a bit. This is just going to be paint, paint, smudge, smudge, paint, paint, smudge, smudge, until we get to something more interesting. So I'll see you in probably only a minute or two. Is that even a minute? I'm not sure. Anyways, I wanted to jump in and talk about the hands. You can see that I changed the background to all gray so that I could see a little bit better. And I took the hand layer and lowered its opacity so you can see the overlap with the wrist and the fingers. And that's so that I can isolate the fingers better so I can paint in the proper shadows. The lines were never really super clear about what these fingers should look like, and once you've sort of blotched in the paint, it's kind of a good idea to go in and define it for what it is instead of trying to adhere to the lines. So that's what I did here, so I could very clearly see where the fingers end and all that. Not only though, when I resize the head, will you see that I have to repaint parts of the hands, but I also just repaint them because they need to be better. So you'll see that when we get there. Okay, I'll be quiet again for a minute. Sometimes I kind of like the piece when it's only got like the AO on it. It's very similar to when I will do more of like a color pick style where I'm painting all the individual layers and I'm choosing the paint, where I don't put the highlights in yet, and I kind of like it better before the highlights go in. So at this point, I'm starting to actually ask myself if I wanted, how much more I want to do to it. Ultimately, I end up doing a lot more, but I don't go crazy with tricks and make it all look super glossy or anything, so I still think that it captures what I'm looking for. But this is a moment where I'm sort of saying, hey, I really kind of like the softness and the no direct shadow, and nothing's too rich or too dark or whatever, so maybe that's kind of cool. But then I decide not to. What you see here is me putting a dark outline around her figure that I'm then going to lower the opacity of, sort of trying to create almost like a more graphic, fakey, like AO, like bloom kind of thing, like shadow bloom. Is that a thing people say? I just do it with line. You've seen me do this on previous pieces. In fact, I did it on compound, and so that's what this is about to be. But then I also do another trick, which I think you've seen me do before, where I fill in everything around her figure, and then I blur that slightly, and then I set that to multiply, and I delete everything around her figure. And right there you can see, now she has this soft shadow all around her body. That's a quick way to get that, or I should say to do the first step of getting that, but you can see that like where her leg overlaps, right there I just painted it in. Since it was around the overall cutout of her body, we had to go ahead and put that in. Also, we'll jump in here on the face. You see it encroached too far on her face, so we need to clean that up around her chin just to make sure that she doesn't look like she's got 5 o'clock shadow, since that's not what we're going for in this particular piece. Since I'm in there, I'm also using this opportunity to put the darker upper lip, which I believe I've mentioned in the last 2 pieces, is something that I do fairly regularly. Just because it doesn't matter what the lighting is, I just find having the differentiation between those 2 lips to be important for like visual clarity. I could also put it on her lower lip if the light's coming from below her, but this is kind of a weird piece in the sense that she's flipped, but her lighting is still coming from what would be kind of like above her. It's coming from like the bottom right, so that's why it's okay to sort of do that with her lip. So now we're going to actually start on the direct shadow. This is done with, I believe, the same color as the AO shadow. It doesn't really matter in terms of, like, you can tweak it a little. They don't have to be exactly the same. They can be, but whatever. Like, make it look how you want to look. And so we're going to zoom in now on her upper half, because we did the cast shadow from the graphic circle and from one leg onto the other leg, and now we're starting to figure out how that cast shadow is going to work on her body. And then we'll move from through the layers like we normally do up to eventually her face and hair and all of that kind of stuff. I'm mostly focusing on cast shadow. I'm mostly focusing on the direction of the lighting so that I can try to reinforce that. And this shadow is much harsher, much crisper, and that's just because it's specifically shapes casting shadows onto other things. It's almost like punching a hole out of the light, as opposed to something that's soft gradient and trying to sell the turning of a form. This is like something is in the way of the light and it's punching that shape into it. For me, this is kind of the most fun part of a piece, because you just get to go all ham-fisted in there and like punch all of this dimension in and this darkness to bring all this contrast, and it's kind of fun. It's I don't know, it's less tedious than the AO part, and it's also less monotonous than the flatting part, so it's just kind of fun. But this is cool because we also get to really define some of these features. We've got this hard shadow coming in, really selling the shape of her nose. We get to punch in these tiny little dark shadows eventually around the fingers to really sell the distance between the fingers and the palm and just sort of how everything's positioned. So it's just kind of fun. But of course we then later will have to go in and fix that hand. Here for the objects that are casting shadows onto other objects, we're just basically going to be doing like a duplicate layer and a fill and a multiply. So what I'm doing is I'm taking those circles and I'm just selecting their shape and then filling in the shadow, because that's all on different layers. The background is all part of a different layer set, and I'm just filling in the shadow color, setting it to multiply, and scooting it over to match the direction of the light. Same thing with her body. Her body has been duplicated into a flat shadow that is the same as all the other shadows, and then set to multiply and scooted all the way back on those layers. So the background layers are like a bunch of background stuff, and then the circles, which the background stuff will come in a second, all the circles, and then the shadow layers on top, and then we get into the character flats and then the character shadows and lighting. Also, what you were just seeing flicker in throughout all of that was me starting to put the bounce light. You can see, for instance, on that pinkish circle, the shadow, and then you can see the skin bouncing onto that shadow, which again will all have to be adjusted when we go back in and repaint. Now we're doing the shine on the hair. Her highlights are all going to be a blue, and so the shine of the hair is no different. The shine of the hair is going to be the bluest because it's going to be picking up the true light color more than, say, for instance, skin would reflect. But so what we're doing right now is we're just painting in where I want that shine to go, and then we'll also generate a fatter shine around it so that we're creating kind of like a stepped shine look. So you'll see it right here. So we've got sort of that duller, wider shine and then the hotter interior shine, and I'll smudge that around and stuff and get it to be exactly how I want it to. And that'll just be done with a blue layer that's almost the exact same color as that background, and then it's lowered in opacity for the main shine, and then the fatter shine is lowered even more. And then the one for her skin and everything else will be, well, I should say everything else, I mean she's all skin basically. Everything else will be just another layer that's had its opacity adjusted as well. All those dots flying around in the background were me saying, hey, maybe that's a good idea, but it wasn't. And now we're putting in sort of a painty, lasery type thing, although with this style it doesn't really come in as a laser, and that's kind of the cool thing. The difference between this and like the chrome and lasers and stuff is it's more almost like a paint line or a, I don't know, just dynamic graphic element, I guess. Here's where I decide I'm going to put some texture onto or patterns I should say, onto the circles so that we can make those more interesting. We do this little checkerboard pattern just by lining up some lines, duplicating it, flipping it, and then using some smart selecting and erasing to generate a checkerboard pattern. And then we just throw that on there and clip away what isn't on the circle. We're also going to see that background color flip. It's going to have the darker blue go towards the bottom and the lighter blue go towards the top because it just worked better that way. So now we're doing the highlight layer. You can see me there playing with the entire thing, changing its color and just sort of seeing exactly what I want to do with it. And I left it zoomed out for this instead of going in and seeing the details of all of it, because a lot of it happens very quickly throughout the entire thing. So I just thought it would be better to watch everything happening at once. Here we just do a little bit of an extra shadow on the dark side of her body. If the light is coming from the bottom right, we just add a little bit of extra soft shading there. This was done with an airbrush, but then I go in and I smudge it a bit just to give it a little bit more of a paint feel. I think that was just done because at the time I was wanting to lay it in softly, and then I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't wrestling with it the entire time. We also take this opportunity to put some more dimension in other elements. You can see right there I'm working on her right boob, and then I move over to her bangs and give those a little bit more dimension, and I'm really just, and the little sides of the hair. I'm just going through now and using that layer to make sure everything feels as dimensional as it should. And now we put in a rim light. It comes in really hot, but we do knock that back a fair amount. I actually used to love putting a white hot rim light on something, but over the years I've kind of eased on that a little bit. Okay, we're wrapping up the rim light, or at least this stage of the rim light. I just adjust the lines of the circle a little bit. If you go back a few seconds, you can see that on that pink circle, the lines of the yellow were a little tangential with the edge of it, and I wanted to not have that because it was really starting to annoy me. So we're going in and we're putting in all this rim light work, and then we're going to repaint that in hand eventually anyways. We're getting close to the stage where all of the changes are going to come in. Now when I do these changes, I just want everyone to know that even though I have this very methodical way about putting together my files, and I have like these shadow layers that are organized and all that, when I have something that's kind of like a quick fix, the idea of like going back through all those layers and completely adjusting the flats and then the shadows on top of that and then the other elements, sometimes I will do that for sure, especially if I kind of want to future-proof the file and like if I need to hand it to someone else. But for the purposes of this, I just did it with some like sort of scorched earth techniques. I merged stuff and cut stuff and moved stuff and then color picked when I repainted it, and so you'll see that happening on the foot right there. You just see it, you just saw it get shorter, and then I will actually even redraw it in its entirety while trying to adjust it, and then I will treat the other foot with just sort of similar adjustments, and then we'll adjust the head size. That'll be the last thing actually that happens in this illustration. And now we enter foot surgery. This will see me redrawing it and just trying to get it right. To be honest, like, it was kind of a challenge. I can draw a foot standing on a surface. I can draw a foot ready to jump. I can draw a foot in like lots of different ways without even having to reference. Then I take the next step, which is something looks weird, so I reference it. And then if I'm referencing something and I still am not getting it right, I just start banging my head against the wall. And there's something about this sort of just like limp way that this foot is posed that it drove me crazy. So it came out in a way that's better than it was before, although I will fully say that it doesn't come out perfectly. So yeah, let's just let that play out. Okay, foot nightmare is over, and we move into head nightmare in a minute. Now we're going to jump right into a zoomed in view so that you can see the cleanup work that I do. At the end, we'll go through the major stages of the piece, and you'll be able to much more clearly see the head adjustment in that part. So if you really want to see the proportion change, you're going to see that at that point. You can also see there's a gradient overlay that gets thrown over the top. There's just some last minute things that happen here. We'll try to reference that very quickly at the end. So now here I flatten the head and I've cut it and shrunk it. And so now I have to go in and color pick and fix all these spots. Now you can see right there, because of that light colored ridge there, I'm painting underneath everything first to get a base going underneath that. It also makes it so that the work that I did to cut out the arm and all that is still nice, meaning I put that work in, so I might as well use that depth there. And then after I put those sort of base layers in, I do a layer on top where I'm actually patching the unreconciled parts where the cut wasn't super great, where some of the paint is getting borrowed from the arm into the hair, and sometimes vice versa. Here goes the patch layer where we start painting over the top. We're also trying to respect the fact that that is a cast shadow, and we want to make sure that the shadow still lands in the right spot. I also take this opportunity to embellish a couple of things here or there. Just make sure that I get some loose hairs painted in if it comes to mind. Make sure that the hair like around the neck looks good. Make sure we get that shadow put back in now underneath the head, because we've scooted, when we shrunk the head we couldn't just leave it where it was, we also had to scoot it down a bit. And so now we are moving on to the hand. You could see at the last second there I also threw in the bounce from the arm onto her hair, the bounce light. And now we are going to completely repaint this hand in a way that makes me less irritated. That's the goal. The ultimate goal of an artist is to call something finished and not be irritated. So you can see me painting things in just right on top, but I left like that dark part because that's where she would still cast that shadow, or at least that's my hypothesis at this point. As we start going in and cleaning all of this up and trying to adjust everything to where it needs to be, we'll then turn the background on, which then we'll realize, oh, right, the shadow would change where her head would cast as well. So I'm just going to shut up now. All you need to know here is that I am trying to make sure that I've cleaned everything up, and I'm sampling colors and just painting on top on 1 or 2 layers and then mashing them together and continuing the process. Okay, and we are nearing the end of this. You can see I'm doing that. I'm adjusting all the shadows. I'm making sure everything makes sense as much as possible. I'm cleaning up those little things. Like I made this decision to put this black outline on everything, so now I gotta re-put that in the right ways. Now that we've changed the shape of the hands and the hair. And now I've slowed this part down at the very end just so we can talk for a second. you're going to see some layers get flipped on. You're going to see the head blink on and off like a million times because I'm just trying to rationalize, did I make the right call to shrink the head? I think I did. Yeah, this is really just the last stretch where the last little bit of details are all thrown on. And here is the final version of the illustration. Now I could have gone way further with making this look 80s in terms of like aging it or lightening the shadows because maybe the print wasn't super good. Not that the 80s had like absolutely dreadful print, but I could have just done things to make it look a little bit more old and printed. But I decided not to. I wanted it to still feel like a clean, modern illustration. I do have the VHS sort of 80s up version of it, which you can see it on my Instagram if you go back a bit. For this, the final true version is this version here. So now let's take a second and look at the 4 major stages. The first one was the sketch stage. This is where we were at pretty quickly into the piece, and then we decided to move into the color keys. So then we went and threw all this paint down. You could see that even things like the blush on the feet are just crude little painted blotches in there. There's nothing really considered there. It's more just about, am I on the right track for the vibe of this piece? Here are the flats. This is the last stage where you can see the head at the larger size. And then we're just going to do like a massive jump into, this is all the other layers turned on so that we can see the final thing. I'm really happy with the way it came out. I felt like this was during a period of time where I was just really happy with all of my pieces. This one, the giant robo girl, the next one, the last video, or excuse me, not the last video. No, yeah, the last video. I was thinking the last video was Compound, but the last video was Tamira. I thought Tamira came out great, and I think that the girl in the next one also looks really good, so I hope you look forward to that one. So, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this one or other videos, please consider liking and subscribing. Really, truly, commenting. I love talking to everybody, hitting that bell, doing all those things sort of lets the algorithm know that you like this and that people like this. So if it's not too much of a hassle, please try to remember to do those things if you in fact feel that way. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are all the places you can find me. Let me go through them for you. YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, ArtStation, Facebook, DeviantArt, Big Cartel, and Teespring. I am Zatransis everywhere, so if you're on something and you want to know if I'm there, just try to find that name.